Call the meeting to order. First thing you said after the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next one, we'll be doing the executive session. And we'll come out with no decision. And it's to do with public employee business. How long? 45 minutes. All righty. Next thing on the agenda is the novel.
All right. So, we have an appeal of one of our instructional materials, and it's a library material. It's the book Eleanor and Park, and you know this because you've been getting updates about this along the way. This book, Eleanor and Park, was part of the Battle of the Books at Orting Middle School, and a parent made a request to challenge this book. And so when it started at the school level, the principal removed the book from Battle of the Books. And the parent request was based on the content and language not being age appropriate. When it was selected as a supplemental material for the classroom, copies were also put in the library at Orting Middle School. So this could be checked out by students from the library. So what has moved forward then is, because this remained a library material, is challenging this as a library, as a resource in the library. From the teacher's perspective, this book was selected by the teacher because it's an award-winning young adult work that she says students find engaging to read, and many students identify with the character and the situations in the book. The parent is contesting the book because it's inappropriate for middle school students and needs to be removed from circulation. So that's some of the background of why this came up and how it came up. So you have a timeline in board docs that spells out everything. What you see is the first 5 items were interactions and work that mostly happened at the building level. So this really has gone through the chain of command. Starting at the building level, the parent worked with the principal who pulled the book, and then it was contested from there. After that, it moved to the district level, and at that point went to the executive director of teaching, learning, and assessment. And the next 8 items on the timeline are what has happened at the district level, starting with meetings with Executive Director Rabb, Principal Slagle, the parent, meeting to talk about the book, ongoing email exchange and face-to-face meetings, the principal and executive director reading the book, following back up with the parent. And then the book went to the Instructional Materials Committee. The Instructional Materials Committee then met on the book, and I'll fill you in on that. Ultimately, they decided to keep the book in the middle school library with conditions. They didn't decide what those conditions are, because after that decision, then the parent brought it to the school board to determine if the process was followed. What's interesting about this policy, as compared to other policies, is usually there's a superintendent step in there. So it goes from the building to the executive director level, and then to the superintendent, and then to the school board. And with this one, I didn't have the opportunity to have a superintendent, level built into it. So it's going right from the Instructional Materials Committee to you. Looking at board policy, I'll just highlight a couple things from here. Board Policy 2021 is about library information and materials. One thing that this policy says is that we have a broad array of resources in our library and citizens who wish to challenge a resource can do that, and that process is outlined in 2021 P, so the procedure. So looking at that, part of this says that teacher librarians are going to select materials in libraries. It doesn't provide a lot of depth of guidance around that. There's some general guidelines that I believe need to be fleshed out. But some of the things I think relate specifically to this are that the materials in the libraries need to meet the interest, vocabulary, maturity, and ability levels of all students. So that's quite broad. And then another element of that stands out to me regarding this specific incident is we include materials in the collection because of their academic, literary, and/or artistic value and merit. So right now, teacher librarians select the materials. We recognize that we need to develop filters for the selection of materials so that the teacher librarians have guidance. The other thing we recognize is we have teacher librarians at our elementary schools, but our secondary schools have paraeducators who library media text. So we need to have a plan for that when there's not a teacher librarian at the school. Looking at the same procedure, I was just looking at what's the most pertinent part of these procedures for this particular case. It says that items selected in the library will, and there's a list, and the thing that Executive Director Rabb and I talked about is we believe this pertains. It needs to contain appropriate subject matter for the age, emotional development, ability level, learning styles, and social development of the students for whom they're selected. And then it outlines the specific process for challenging a book. So this book went to the Instructional Materials Committee as part of the challenge process. And the Instructional Materials Committee set out with an initial question of, does Eleanor and Park meet the board criteria for quality instructional or supplemental materials for middle school students? And then, of course, their outcome was leave it in the library, put conditions around checking it out. And after that, now it's being appealed to you. You got to hear that appeal from the parent in the community comments, and you have that letter, and you also have it in board docs. I had the opportunity to meet with Executive Director Rapp and the family, and one thing that I took away from that meeting was in relation to the comments on her second page where she says this opposing argument was shared around comparing my request to opening Pandora's box. And what I better understood this after talking with the parent, and my takeaway from that conversation, and I reiterated it with the family to make sure I was understanding, was that the idea that the decision that the Instructional Materials Committee was making for this book was going to set precedents with other books and how we handle future books. And so what I heard from her was, rather than only keeping it isolated to this book, that the committee started considering the weight of the decision of this on future instructional materials. So I heard that as kind of I think the crux of their concern, at least one of the cruxes of their concern from that meeting. And so here we are. And the policy says that the board is going to decide if the process was followed and if the criteria were used, and then what the next steps are. And again, I haven't had the opportunity to give input. I'm happy to help support you in your decision and answer any questions. It's easier to answer questions as well.
Thank you for providing us all these books. I have to speak from my own personal experience reading this book. It's alarming. The story, even in the back, it describes it being foul-mouthed, sexy. It's captivated for teens. And that word teen, in my opinion, would be an age group that's not in middle school, it'd be in high school. The concern that I have is that we currently do not have a system in place to monitor checking this book out in middle school. And so we need to figure out a decision tonight, how we create a system, and then also figure out, do we keep this in the high school, or do we allow a system to be in place so that, parents are aware, or, the child is tagged, or maybe we mark the books and we figured that out. In my opinion, while we are deciding on a system, we should remove the book from the middle school library.
I share Jennifer's opinion and concern. So some important points that stuck out to me. First of all, you mentioned or policy 2021P, item 2A says all items will meet the criteria in A through I, not one of the criteria, but it will meet all of the criteria. And in my mind, Eleanor in part does not meet the criteria for being appropriate subject matter for 8th graders. And I think that was as evidence that it was determined to be at a 9th grade reading level by most of the reviews. It did, however, meet the criteria for deselection, G6, inappropriate reading level. So my opinion also is that it should be removed without any conditions that exist currently. It doesn't belong there. I had a question for the committee. One person researched the reviews, and it wasn't clear to me if that was the position of the committee, that everybody was fine with one person doing the reviews, and if there was agreement that that was a fair assessment of the book. So that was one question I did have about the process of the committee. And then also,
I think that's one, from what I understand. I think there could have been some front loading of that. Because somebody did the research, came and brought it in the meeting, and then in the moment, Steve was able to look at it and say, okay, here's what I see from the ones I'm reviewing now. But I don't think we did a deep dive of understanding it and then kind of bringing maybe a summary of that to the meeting, or building the understanding of all the people in the room at the meeting.
right.
So I don't know. I don't think that part was probably.
So
I
that would
think we
be,
could have done that part better.
yeah, I think that would have been nice to know if the committee supported that assessment that it's a 9th grade reading level. I'm assuming, since I haven't heard pushback on that, that there was support for it. It would be nice to know. And then to me, it appears that the final decision on whether or not to deselect Eleanor and Park, that it was deferred until it could be reviewed through the lens of those conditions. And so to me, we did not follow policy on providing a final decision on this one book. And so for that reason, I agree it should be removed from the library. It's in the wrong place. It would belong at the high school reading level. And I would also, I have recommendations for changing our policy. I would like to see more balance on the committee, more than just one parent represented. I also think that in some cases it may be necessary to have a neutral facilitator to ensure the process is followed, to aid the group in objective discourse, and to provide accountability and clarity, because there were pieces in this process that were vague to me. And I don't know if this necessarily fits within the policy, but establishing a timeline for expectations. So should this process, if it runs its whole course, take 2 months, 6 weeks, 6 months, something to give both the community, the parents, and the staff, everybody else, clear expectations on what this review process should take.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know one of the points of frustration was that the issue was brought, I got looped in starting in around April, I think. But I saw in a communication where the parents said, I brought this up in February.
Yeah, right. So that, just some clarity around that, I think would help us. And then, I also feel strongly, and this isn't necessarily a policy improvement, but I believe that these requests for reconsideration should be handled objectively and with fairness. And individuals may not agree or like the outcome, but they should feel that the process was followed fairly and appropriately and that their voice was heard. So in the end, they may not agree with the outcome, but it should be a sound process. So anyway, I am in agreement with Jennifer, and I'd like to see policy improvements when it comes up for review.
Since you didn't have a chance, what kind of recommendation you would recommend to the committee about the book?
Yeah, it's, I think it's similar to what you're saying, maybe. I think I hear you, you might be saying it belongs at the high school. My recommendation would be, if the instructional materials committee said, we want to keep it, but we want conditions, those aren't in place. So I would say, we need to pull it, and then we need the filters for determining what materials are appropriate for, in this case, middle school library, and what conditions are in place for certain books. And then I would say the instructional materials committee needs to bring this, once those are like objectively done outside of the lens of just this, then I would say the instructional materials committee needs to look at this book through those filters and through those conditions to see if it's an appropriate place for some or any kids at the middle school. But until that happens, I think it needs to be.
I'm not a fan of censorship, and we have advanced students and mature students who may appreciate the value of the book. I actually think it's a good book, and it's sad that it's relatable to so many students, but it could have been just as effectively written without the vulgarity. And so my hope is that there's a good alternative that maybe doesn't, it's graphic and it's real, and I don't want to censor the real life experiences that students have. I just think that there's a time and a place for using educational material and putting it in front of the students, and it's not the 8th grade. So.
I get the sense, and I think we're all feeling the policy itself as well as probably vague in areas and needs refinement. At the same time, it would be cumbersome to try and write every, in an attempt to be more explicit about what the policy covers. It would be cumbersome to try and detail that out. It would be a massive policy. Is there value in maybe researching the potential of some trusted third-party, clearinghouses or lists that would help bring guidance to at least age appropriateness at different levels. At least to look and see if there are tools out there that could be reviewed and relied upon to maybe catch these as a filter. Probably not as an end all. We would need to reserve the right to make decisions as we need to, but it's kind of a first stop. I think right now what we have is in theory right now is a situation where we're trying to figure out what do we do about something that we're not sure if we should remove it from a particular area, but we haven't really talked about, well, what is our standard of keeping it from getting in the first place?
Yeah.
Like theoretically, and I don't imagine that this would happen, but theoretically anybody could come in and say, well, I want to use this book, and now, and it could be something that to everyone involved is obvious it shouldn't be there, but now for reasons having to do with the trickle down supplemental materials that now end up in the library, and we look at it and go, wait, that possibly that should have not gotten in there in the first place. So we have a dilemma right now talking about whether we should remove something. It might be good to have to at least investigate the feasibility of having some filters in place that actually stop things from getting there, or at least some general guidelines that could be used as a gauge by which to make exceptions, as opposed to getting stuff in and then having a dilemma when it comes to whether we should be removing it or not.
I'm sure WASDA has something out there that could give us a hand on to make sure something like that don't get in and stuff like that. I'm sure they got guidelines and stuff and third parties that we could use. I think WASDA has something up.
And there always needs to be room for judgment, right? So
And that's why you would have a committee in place.
Right,
For
but
that review.
the way the policy is written, it kind of takes any committee and hangs it out there, because anybody's, you could look at all of those things in the policy and really you could ask 10 people and probably get 10 different places on the spectrum of those different things on what's appropriate, what's not, what's educational, what's not. So there might be wisdom in finding some trusted baselines to at least start the conversation.
So you're looking from us tonight, what guidelines that we need to put in place and what you're looking for?
Well, I agree that we need filters on the front end for what goes into the system. And if we're gonna have any books that have conditions, then we need to, have that.
Deal with it.
And also I like the idea of what are some sources that we're gonna confer with to make decisions if materials should get into the library. So I think all that needs to be work that happens. Specifically, what I'm hearing for this book, which is the decision that we have to make today, or the decision we have to make ultimately, is for this book I'm hearing pull it from middle school, and it's appropriate because most of the resources say ninth grade. At least what I heard two board members say is it seems like it belongs at the high school and not the middle school.
I'd like to pull it, and then if there's an opportunity, once the conditions are created, if there's cause to consider it, put it through those conditions. I don't think it'll make it through those conditions, but, yeah,
But at least that way you're being consistent with the
Right.
process, so.
right.
If we put those conditions in place, and then that becomes the lens by which you can run any question
Yeah.
through, then it's a more consistent process.
Is that the will of the whole board?
Yeah,
Should we take action?
that's the procedurally, I think it is.
Yeah, let's
It's
take
something we
action,
need
then
action
I
for.
have a clear direction of,
So somebody to put a motion of what actually would you want done with the book?
I want to make sure I understand what we're making an
Okay.
action on, so if we agree to pull the book from the middle school library, does that then, if I recall, puts any further action on pause for 3 years? Does that apply to this?
I saw that too. And what I heard you say is, if there's a reason to reconsider it. So it's not that what I heard in that comment was, if we pull it, put it at the high school, but there's a request to bring it to the middle school. Like I heard you say, if there's a cause to reconsider it for the middle
Yeah.
school, like a teacher says, I want to use
Right.
it, or there's a request, then put it back through the filters that we identified.
Into the middle school.
Yeah, and see if it makes it. But what I didn't hear you say is pull it until we make the filters and then automatically put it back. I heard you say if there's a reason to, then
Yeah.
put it through those filters.
No,
And so in that case, it wouldn't have to wait 3 years because it would be in your motion, if that's what you want to propose, we would be able to reconsider it for the middle school. If there's,
If we meet the criteria.
and if there's a reason to, like if there's a specific request, let's say.
yeah.
And what you're also deciding on is first, if you do this, you're saying we don't think the process was followed. And so, here's the action you want.
Can I ask, I feel a certain amount of hesitancy in the group just because it's not often that we take action on something that wasn't very precisely defined before we even showed up at the meeting to say this is what we're taking action on. Given that school is no longer in session, would it make sense to give us the couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks until the next board meeting to actually see precisely the verbiage of what we're saying we are taking action on? And would that make you feel more comfortable about what it is that we think we're saying
No,
yes to?
I'm hesitating, I just wanna make sure I'm understanding the consequences of a motion to pull a book, and what does that mean? Does it then prohibit any student from checking it out for the next 3 years? Or,
Right.
or does it just say, pull it from the middle school library and if there's, as you were saying, reason, if there's a compelling reason to bring it back, what would that reason be, and who would carry the burden of proving that it's worthwhile to have in the school and then worthy of going through those conditions? I'm a little bit nervous that it's.
Yeah, I feel like you don't wanna take action on the fly right now until,
And
Yeah,
also, I would have to be with Tyson, is that I would prefer bringing it back, so we actually know what action we actually gonna take and what the consequences are, than just doing, like, you're right, we didn't have, I think we should bring it back.
The next meeting
Or
is
we
the
can-
18th.
but the book is still in the library.
but school's
I
out.
would like,
School
the
is-
school is
sure,
out, but not having a timeline on those conditions being met, what if it takes 6 months for those conditions to be met? So I would like the book pulled and then perhaps reconsidered what those.
Right, my question on the deferment was just the precise terms of what you're taking action on right at this
Yeah.
moment. Even if the terms of that action are sufficiently open-ended to give you time for a plan. Taking action right now on the fly, we might be like, I don't know what I just said yes to.
Right, yeah.
But you can always change it too,
You can, sure, but I guess the only reason why I even would have gone that route is knowing that since school's out,
So I
Library's
agree
closed, right?
with Carrie that the library is closed, but are we able to remove the book temporarily until we come back in a board meeting and go through policy, have a little bit more clarity on what exactly we're discussing and agreeing on for the action? And maybe also having a timeline of like, when do we get these filters in, and
Well,
can
I
we
was,
temporarily pull it out?
the films and stuff, you can always, that's gonna take a little time for research, but you can make a motion that will have a temporary until, like, pull the book temporarily until the next meeting, blah, 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 and you can, go from there. But you can put up just a little motion to add temporary until July 18th, I think?
July 18th.
July 18th will be our next meeting. So it would be in effect until July 18th. Then we would make we can make another motion and clarify some stuff and make a good motion.
Okay.
That way you'd pull it out the middle school until the 18th.
And what I'll need to know to support you in this is, what information do you not have that you need?
Right.
Until July 18th? What do you need from me to be able to make a motion? Or is there anything you need from me, you just need to think about it?
Right, a little bit more. But one of the questions I have is like, if we, pulling this book out, what does that chain reaction look like for our library system and the books that we have that are similar? Like I was mentioning, the John Green books are also somewhat racy as well. So, what does that look like and how does that affect?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and one thing I want to sort of be careful about is that we make a decision, because this appeal is only about this book.
Right.
That we say, for this book, here's what we decide, and we know we need filters,
Right.
and maybe there's conditions for certain books, and that's a work that we know that has to happen over here. And right now, or soon, because we know the parent's been on a timeline and we want to think about reasonableness of the timeline. We'll make a decision isolated to this one
That's book
book.
only.
Yeah. So here's what I think I heard. And then you can all, whatever information you need from me, let me know. Whatever you need for July 18th. I don't have more information that I have to bring to you, but if you have something you need from me, I'm happy to.
I got one question before you start though.
Okay.
What would be, if we decide to pull out in 18, how difficult would that be since school is out? Would it cause any interruption of, because the librarian is gone, right?
Yeah,
So-
we can easily
Oh, you can
go in
easily-
and just take it out, yeah. There's some copies in the library, but we can just take them. So here's, what I think I heard as a possible motion for July 18th that you're considering. I'm gonna make a motion that the process was not followed, and so we wanna pull the book from Orting Middle School and revisit it if there's a cause to reconsider it, to ensure it meets the filters established.
Yeah.
That's what I think I heard.
Would you read that one more time?
Make a motion that the process was not followed, and so, because that's what you're called to do, and so, we wanna pull the book from Orting Middle School and revisit it if there's a cause to, and then you allow it to be revisited, if there's a cause to reconsider the book, to ensure that it meets the filters established.
But I always put it in the high school.
If the high school wants it, I'm,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not gonna make that decision for them if they have use for it.
So,
I think that sounds good.
and then let me know what you need for July 18th. We'll put it on as an action item. I don't have anything I need to bring,
Yeah, I
but
don't
if
know
there's
what would-
something you need, or want, or have questions about,
I don't think there's
I'm happy to
anything
gather
that
that, what
we-
you want to think about it.
Yeah, I don't have any additional information. I feel like we've had a lot of information on it.
Yeah,
You know, I guess until it's up, I'm curious what the conditions would be and if this book would satisfy those conditions. So when.
that won't be done by July 18th, I think.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is just
Yeah. So I think that
pull
will
it
be,
until those are done
and if, yes.
and then if there's cause to bring it back for a review.
Like say a teacher makes a request and says, I want to use this in my class, or I want to
Yeah.
put these books in the library and they're making a request, then it would be put through those filters and it would need to meet the criteria.
Yeah.
So you're not saying no to the book forever,
Right.
but it's until the conditions are set and if there's a request for it to be.
Okay, we need a motion.
Are we gonna make a motion today or is this for July 18th?
No, just gonna haul off to the 18th.
A motion now.
Or did you want? Yeah.
You want me to down, just pass it out, don't it? You can make a motion.
The library's closed. Yeah, let's wait until the 18th. If there's any consequences to this decision that I'm not aware of right now. And I would turn to you for advice on that. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, we're just not used to taking action on the fly without,
And that would be clarify the motion, make sure we got it legally right.
Yeah.
So, but that's what we'll do.
Okay.
Thank you. Next thing is board comments. Yeah?
I'll comment.
No comments,
No
okay,
comments.
moving on.
Move it on.
With Tyson
Oh,
resigning, I wanted to check in on a possible timeline. So it'd be nice if Tyson could stay and he can. So, working backwards from a July 18th board meeting, if we want to press a timeline where we swear somebody in on July 18th, then we could have a special meeting to interview and select a new board member, even that week. And if that's the case, then backing up from there, even if we do that on July 17th, we could put everything in board docs prior to that. On July 11th, by July 11th, we could post the vacancy, because it has to be posted for a certain amount of time. So really what I'm saying is we can backwards map from the July 18th board meeting if we want to try to swear somebody in at that time. I think the good thing about that is we're gonna hear about the budget, and it'd be nice for a new teammate to hear about the budget because that really sets up the work of the next year. The other thing about that I think is good about that is we have our August board advance, and then the new teammate would be able to join us and hear about the next year and help plan and set the direction of next year.
But we make a plan before we even talk to her, she's available, whoever's around.
Well, we'd have to,
They
we'd have
post
to
it,
Let's
open
go
it,
open
post
generally
it,
speaking, and then we'll,
have the applications and host interviews. It would make sense, I think, to reach out to the person who's running for the position, and I want her to apply.
Right, 'cause she run out of posts.
and I have
Yeah, we
reached out
can't
to
just
her.
appoint her, but we still have to follow that.
Right.
But yeah, and then she would,
She and I are gonna have a conversation tomorrow evening. I don't know what the results of that will be, but I just will kind of give her the
Like to
rundown
see.
of what's happening, and
Yeah.
and I've already told her, obviously, there's no obligation at this point, but we're reaching out because she's unopposed in November in that district, so
yeah.
but we'll see when that goes.
Yeah. So we could post an advertisement, and hopefully she'd be in that. And maybe the only one interested, because otherwise, if somebody was interested, they probably
They
would
would've
have.
ran.
Yeah, it's a pretty short
Yeah.
window.
So, we'll
Okay.
follow
Now that they wanna start a campaign, a writing campaign.
Yeah.
They can do that.
Every day.
They can
So-
start a writing campaign.
What do you think of working backwards from the timeline of swearing someone in on July 18th?
Under the assumption that you have someone raise their hand
Right.
Yeah.
to be considered.
Right. Cause if she said, well, no, I'm gonna wait till November, then whoever will come in for 4 months, a couple of months, cause the school's out, so. Why don't you go ahead and post it, let's get it started, let's see where we at, and you'll talk to her tomorrow,
I'll talk to her
and
tomorrow.
get with Bonnie or her and see where we go from there.
Yeah.
That's all we can do. That's it.
Yeah.
All right.
So was
Any
it-
other comments?
So was an official announcement there? I have to make it in the minutes.
Oh, well, we could, since we're just in board comments anyway, yeah. So, yeah, I guess for the sake of the official minutes, we buying a house. Unfortunately, it's out of the Orting School District. So while I'm not going far, I'll be up on the hill.
Yeah.
The RCW in the letter, but yeah, I had to go through and look it up. Because if you move out of your district, but in the boundaries of the school district, the state has determined you can ride out the remainder of your term. But if you move outside of the district that you're in altogether, then the position becomes vacant. So we're not moving just yet, but it's gonna be, we've got a few weeks of a turnaround because we're in a really tight compressed schedule. So my brain's not gonna be there for the next 3 weeks anyway. And yeah, so.
So you're officially resigned.
Yeah, and I put the letter out for, everyone's got a copy, and Bonnie has a copy as well.
You had to say that.
Oh, then yes, I am officially resigning the post now, in anticipation of moving out of the district.
Well, thank you so much for serving
Oh, yeah,
our
absolutely. This is a
kids
great
and our
group.
community, setting ambitious direction of college careers in life, and putting action plans in place to actually live out so that we really do move toward accomplishing that. So
Thank you for your service.
Absolutely,
Thank you
yeah,
so
thank you
much.
all as well.
Thank you for all the good laughs.
Yeah.
Music.
Guitar.
Gotta have a talent.
Yes.
All right, any other comments? Nope, meeting adjourned.